Today we're doing our training Money Moves, how the Junior League of Boston's finances influence our impact. And we have the pleasure of hearing from Pendry Haynes, who is a financial manager for Harvard Real Estate and holds a master's degree in general management. And she's a longtime member of the Junior League of Boston, former treasurer, and also the founding chair of the Jeremiah program. So with that, we will have Pendry take the floor and begin our training.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here tonight and happy to see so many familiar faces and so many new faces, but either way, I think we all have something to share. So if you have a question, please feel free to either unmute yourself and interrupt me and shout it out, or if you're not in a place where you can do that, you can throw it in the chat, and my good friends Shannon and Alicia will help us out. But there's really no dumb question or a question that is too simple. This is what I do for a living. This is what I spent all of last year doing for the league. And if I came to your work, I would have no idea what was going on. So please feel comfortable asking questions and also adding some color and your experience to whatever we may be talking about. Because while I've been in the league for quite some time, there are things that I don't know, and a lot of you here have a lot of experience that would be beneficial to the group. So let's get started. And if you have listened to the radio anytime in the past couple years, I think you know what Money Moves means, but the actual definition is it describes the ability to have a say in what happens with money. It involves influence over large deals, financial transactions, and business dealings. It results from power, wealth, and/or position. Every member of the league has a say in what happens with our money, whether that's spending on your committee, whether you are a chair or a VP and you create a budget. If you sit on finance council, you help oversee our investments. And if you are a member of the board of directors, you approve all this ultimately. And we have tremendous wealth and power as an organization of 751 members and a $1 million endowment. Not only that, we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in the Boston community every year. So let's take a look at that wealth and what that means. This is a balance sheet, which was taken as of June 30th, 2020, which was the last day of our last fiscal year. It is a point in time that shows us the assets that we own and the liabilities that we owe. You've probably heard the term that assets minus liabilities equals shareholders' equity, and nonprofits don't have owners, so our equity is what's called our net assets. Oops. So if we start at the top, we have a checking account like most businesses do. Luckily, it has some pretty healthy cushion in there. We have our cash reserves, which are in a money market account. The Garden Club has their own checking account that the league overall doesn't really touch, but it's still part of our overall financials. We have the $1 million endowment that I mentioned. We also have a small building fund that we use to make improvements or larger repairs. So that's pretty much everything in cash that's available for us to use at any time that we want or need. Now we get into some of the more specialized funds that require certain uses or certain permissions to use that money. We have the Catherine Boker Fund, which was left to us by a former member, which she gave to support our educational work. We have the Linda K. Ryan Fund, which many of you have heard of because we use it annually to award summer camp scholarships to our program participants. We have the Sellaway Fund that we used a good chunk of last year to increase our community grants because of COVID. And we have the endowment for her, which is pretty new, and that was created as sort of a receptacle for any philanthropic giving that that we create, that we can take in either in stock gifts or cash gifts. And that's the point of that, is to create more of a nest egg to be used down the road. What we also show on the balance sheet are accounts receivable, who owes us money, and other current assets, which are prepaid expenses, things that we pay upfront, like insurance and things like that. So that's everything that's cash. Then we have the building, which is valued at about 1.5 million. We have some furniture and fixtures. And then we also have a lease with a tenant that at that time was getting close to the end. It has now ended. So we drew down that value. So altogether, our assets are over $3.7 million, which is pretty good. Then we get to the liabilities and equity side. Like anyone else, we have bills that we have to pay. We have a small balance on our credit card. We had the security deposit for our tenant that we had to give back when they moved out. And then we have deferred dues. So what that means is if you pay your dues today, since the dues letter went out until April 1st, we hold that money on the balance sheet and we don't count it as income until the next fiscal year, since you're paying your fiscal year 22 dues early. So we do that with dues, GMM fees, and the new member fee. We got a PPP loan when COVID hit, and then we have some other small liabilities. The other thing that I wanted to point out here was that we did take out a loan to renovate headquarters a few years ago, and that has since paid off. So we no longer owe anything for that. So now we get to the equity part, which I think assets and liabilities are a little easier for anyone to understand. The equity part represents the value that would be returned to the company's shareholders if all the assets were liquidated and the company's debts were paid off. So since we're a nonprofit, we don't have shareholders, and hopefully we never get to the point where we ever have to have a fire sale and liquidate anything. But that's what these values represent, is what we as members have a stake in this organization. So we have restricted net assets that, these accounts up here that I mentioned, which have a little bit of rules to them. And then we have unrestricted net assets for our endowment and those sorts of things. So all totaled up, that's about $4,728 per member that is of value in the organization. So that's a lot. We're worth quite a bit. And looking at this, we should all be very proud of ourselves and very grateful to the Bolkers and the Ryans and the Selloways and everyone else who has contributed to our past success. But if you attended the fall GMM, or if you have ever heard me talk, or if you've been active in leadership, you know that there's been a stark change in our financial situation over the past couple years. And while we're worth quite a bit, we're not bringing in as much as we used to. So now we look at the profit and loss. I think we've all heard that revenue minus expense equals profit, and that's what we're looking at here. A few years ago, we had a great profit, and then things slid further and further downhill. And now here we are in COVID. So the problem happens is because we're bringing in a lot less revenue FY18 compared to this year's budget, but the expenses are not all that dissimilar. So when you do the math on that, you get these big negative numbers on the bottom. The stark difference here from FY18, that is the last year that our former tenant, Kate Spade, was with us. We had a very lucrative rental deal with them. And FY18 was the last year we had a show house, which those of you who are not familiar, that was a very large fundraiser that had been going for many, many years. It was quite successful. And we decided that it was time to try something new. So we sundowned that. We had grand plans to come up with something new to replace it. And now here we are where we can't have any events at all. If we look at this revenue in more detail, you can see just how heavily we relied on Kate Spade and on Show House. And now you see these light blue bars in FY21 is what we were budgeted to bring this in this year, which is for a variety of reasons a lot lower. So our main buckets of revenue are the lease rental income from our tenant downstairs, our membership dues, which have had a slight decline in the past couple years as membership declines. And now this year we saw a decline as people were homeschooling their kids and were in tenuous situations and just couldn't commit to the league. We have events such as Show House, Gala, Après Ski, a lot of those things that hopefully you had a chance to go to in prior years. You'll see last year how that dropped off completely in March because we weren't able to have Gala. We have grants and sponsorships, which have sort of ebbed and flowed over the years. We have our giving to the annual fund, which we are all committed to do. Giving to the community and training fund, which we're also all committed to do. We have program and GMM fees, such as your new member course fee, your transfer fee, things like that. We have our endowment income. So of course, if you have over $1 million, that generates more income. And then we have a few other things like late fees and those sorts of things. So we've gone from really one extreme to the other, from the heyday of Kate Spade and Show House. And now here we are in COVID and we can't have any events at all. And our retail tenant has just moved out recently. And of course, nobody wants to sign a lease anywhere really. So that's a little bit on pause. But going back to our friend Cardi B, we used to be, bloody shoes people. We could afford the best and we didn't have to, pinch our pennies like we do now. Now we are Old Navy flip-flop people. So it's been a tough transition, but we're making it work. So the next question becomes, if our two biggest sources of revenue are uncertain, where can we grow others? We've been quite reliant on our lease rental income and our events. So how can we focus more on creating this culture of philanthropy, of having people be engaged with their money in a different way? More in these buckets of grants and sponsorships, annual fund, and community and training. Fund developments are expensive to produce. And, we've heard a lot of questions of, how do I get my money's worth from these events? These tickets are really expensive, those sorts of things. And it becomes difficult. So we want to get away from those transactional relationships and get people to actually buy into the mission. Any questions before we move on? I feel like I've been saying the same, Kate Spade COVID story for over a year now. So hopefully this shouldn't come as a surprise for anyone. So on the expense side, the biggest question I heard when I was treasurer was, where does my money go? I pay a lot of dues. I have to give to the annual fund, the CNT. I pay to go to these events. Where does all that money go? Well, here we are. Our community programs and grants cost money. All the supplies for events with the girls, field trips, food, art supplies, you name it. The grants that we give out every year at the GMM to other community partners, that costs money. Fund development events are also a huge source of our expenses. So you'll see here, Show House was very successful for us, but it also costs a lot to produce, and it was a huge amount of effort on a very small group of people. So that's one of the reasons that we were trying to find something new. We also pay AJLI a portion of your dues. When we sign up on Digital Cheetah with our credit card, some of that money goes straight out the door to our mothership in New York. That's not money we get to keep. Membership events cost money, whether you pay to attend them or not. We used to have holidays at our house, things like that, the food, some of those other things, that all adds up. A lot of our trainings we pay for speakers, technology and communications for Digital Cheetah, wireless internet. Now, of course, we have Zoom and all these sorts of things. Our real estate taxes are a huge expense, about $85,000 a year, because we own our building. And then last but not least, we have admin expenses, which are mainly salary for Katie and Shannon, and the expenses it takes to maintain our headquarters, elevator, snow removal, pest control, all those things like that.
Andrea, we actually have a question.
All right.
From the audience. Where does the $1.5 million value of the building come from?
$1.5 million comes from the purchase price that we paid for it that's been depreciated over the years. So the initial value is basically zero. And then what the 1.5 comes from is the significant renovations that we made in 2016, 2017-ish, I believe. Does that answer your question?
Question, Kathleen.
Yeah, so that was my question. I just put it in there because I think that it just, somebody saying, wow, it's a building on Newbury Street. My condo is worth 1.5 million. How are those two things of equal value?
So there is a difference between book value and market value. I would hope that if we ever needed to sell the building, we could sell it for much more than that. This 1.5 is what we hold on our books of what we think it's worth. And again, we depreciate it over the years. So that just goes down and down and down until we make improvements again. So there's book value, there's market value, and there's also assessed value, which is what the city of Boston thinks it's worth. And that's the calculation that they use to charge us taxes. So all three of those things could be three different numbers.
Also, we have another question. How often is the building assessed?
That I don't know. I'm sure it was assessed when we got a building permit to do the renovation. That's usually a trigger for the city to say, you're making improvements and we need to come look at it again. So I would imagine that was the last time.
Great.
But we want the assessed value to be very low and we want the market value to be very high.
Right. Well, I have a question. Were there any changes from the last time you gave this training in terms of, I think you were talking about the building being assessed or something. There was some kind of change that.
There has been a change in our real estate tax. The amount that the city is charging us every month has gone down this year from last year. They didn't say why, but I would imagine it has to do with COVID and the lack of retail activity that's taken place on Newbury Street. And I'm also guessing that they wanted to make a show of goodwill for the onslaught of requests for help and abatement are coming. So that's the change there. But luckily for myself, when I did this presentation, I used mostly the same slides. So today I only had to make a few updates. Anybody else? Okay. Where was I? Okay, so you'll see that last year, when everything came to a screeching halt in March, some of our expenses went down dramatically. So a lot of these sort of turquoise bars are a lot lower than they were in previous years, but a lot of them were not, such as technology, taxes, and then our maintenance expenses. We still had to maintain the building, and even if we weren't in it, and we could not have done without our wonderful staff who really stepped in when everything sort of went to hell. So we still take care of them. And yeah, it's been rough this year with so much change and yet so many things that still remain the same. So the question now becomes, how do we conserve expenses on some of these things that we can in order to pay for the things that we still need to pay for, even though we're not using the building, we are all online. Some of those questions. The easiest answer, which is easier said than done, of course, is to increase these grants and sponsorships to cover some of these expenses, even if we aren't able to have events. The other answer is to not necessarily cut back on what we're doing, but use less cash to do that. And Kathleen and everyone else, a lot of other people have heard me refer to the cheese plate economics of what we need to change. So in the old days when we could have events, I feel like everything had a cheese plate, right? Every open house, every GMM, all of these things, because most of us work, we come right from work, you come to a meeting or training and you need something to eat. In the old days, we would pay cash from our checking account for that. What we really need to start doing is saying to a big vendor like, Wegmans or Roach Brothers or someone like that, to say, hey, we are an organization of 750 women. You will get X amount of eyes on your product. Would you like to be our cheese plate sponsor for this year? These are all the great things we do in the community. This is how you can support that work. So I don't think the conversation has ever been, what can we not do or what can we cut? The conversation has been more, how can we use less cash to do the things that we want to do? Does that make sense to everybody? Because that's something that requires buy-in from all membership, right? Everyone from the chair to whoever's planning the event, you're the one on the ground who knows what your needs are. And so how can we build the infrastructure that somebody in the league, whether it's someone in fund development or the board of directors or whatever, can go out and find you the tangible goods that you need, and maybe we can write fewer checks for those.
Andre, I did get a question. One is wondering if you could explain how items expensed for last year that were not used were accounted for this year.
What do you mean by items that were?
So for example, the gala expenses for last year, how were they accounted for this year?
So last year in March, when we thought this whole COVID thing is only going to last a couple of months, it'll be gone by Easter, we are going to postpone the gala till June. And then June came along and things were arguably worse. And it was clear that we needed to postpone longer. So the idea was to have the gala this March. So basically what we did is, unfortunately, we were so close to that date, right? In March, like everything was set. The committee had worked so hard, everything, was ready to go. And literally the rug was pulled out from under them. We had paid for everything, the Fairmont. We'll actually get into their budget in a second, but we basically picked those expenses up and we put them down in this current year, doing a little accounting trick called an accrual. So they formerly sat on the P&L. We moved them to the balance sheet last year, and then we moved them back to the P&L in FY21. So then, now that it's March again, and we still can have the gala, luckily the team was able to get a lot of that refunded. We also refunded a lot of the ticket purchases as well. So it was a lot of work and a lot of disappointment for the ladies that had worked so hard, but financially, I think all's well that ended well, since we got a good chunk of that money back. Anybody else? The only other thing that I wanted to say here was, not only do we want to start thinking about cheese plate economics, but we also want to think about investing versus spending. We spend a lot on little things, small dollar items. How can we invest, especially in our technology, in our community programs, in our members, and in our building, so that we build those assets for the future? We spend a lot on our building and our headquarters, and so how can we use it more efficiently to maximize that high dollar?
Pendry, we have another question from Ashley Balsmer. Does our fiscal year align with the calendar year or the junior or the league year?
It is a fiscal year that runs from July 1st to June 30th. So it follows our natural flow of the league year.
Thank you.
Okay, so COVID, Kate Spade, we get it, right? How do we move on? Well, when we made the budget for this year, we thought that things would be normal, but by now, of course, they aren't. But if you sort of put yourself back in that February, March, April optimistic timeframe, this is what we thought the year would look like. So this budget shows how we use our net assets that we saw on the balance sheet to fulfill our mission. You will see that we have a very sizable loss, as we did in the 20 budget. We also had a loss in 19. So why do we keep doing this to ourselves? Well, originally we thought that the tenant struggle would be temporary. When Kate Spade notified us that they were leaving, we thought, okay, that's really unfortunate, but we'll hire a broker, we'll find somebody else, and everything will be bright and shiny again. But it turns out the struggle is real. Even before COVID, it was not as great as we thought it would be. We were getting a lot of competition from the Seaport, other places in the city that are competing with Newbury Street, where once upon a time, Newbury Street was the premier place to have a retail store. And on top of that, as we all know, retail brick and mortar has been struggling overall. So that's how we ended up with Fat Face. It was a short-term, pretty low dollar deal, but we thought, okay, well, we will just take this to tide us over until we find something more long-term and something that looks a lot more like our Kate Spade arrangement. And then COVID hit, and now we are still looking. So fortunately, we have the cash reserves to cover these huge losses. So while we are fortunate that we don't need to panic, we do need to make a change. And luckily, I think we are finding a lot of silver linings in COVID. It's forcing us to change the way we operate and change the way we think about a lot of different things. So there's at least one thing that the First Lady of Massachusetts, Lauren Baker, and the rapper Cardi B have in common, and they both encourage us to use our own power. If you remember back to the fall GMM in 2019, last year, you remember Mrs. Baker saying that women have purchasing power, and there are some opportunities that we can capture right here in this $741,000. We have the ability to decide what we spend that on, how we spend it, where we spend it. So right now, we need to use that power to be agents of change in our own organization, which will likely require some tough choices. Those tough choices start with understanding. So let's look at how we got to this big, scary 274 number. So it starts with every single community program, every group has its own budget. And we capture everything from tickets, raffle tickets, our lease income, utilities, all of these things for every single program. So community we look at is one bucket. Each program has its own budget. Each development event has its own budget. Every membership group. We have operations, which we break down in a couple different categories. And then we have communications, GMM, board of directors, all of these things. We sit down and, and go through their budget line by line. And when you add it all up, you get to here. And then what I did is I excluded depreciation because that's not real. And then I added our estimated fee for our broker because we thought we would have a new tenant this year. So we get to this negative $274,000 number. The good thing about this broker fee is that it is a commission. So it's looking like we will not be signing a deal before June 30th, which means we won't have to pay that fee. So there's a little bit of good news, bad news there. You've probably never seen this before, but what you might have seen is something like this. So in order for the treasurer and the finance council to get to this number, they need you to share with them your own budget for your own committee. And I picked the Jeremiah program because that's near and dear to my heart, but it's also very simple. So the treasurer and the treasurer-elect and the finance council will send you something like this. They're looking for your input here of what your budget should be and what resources you need to successfully execute your program. For most of our community projects, that's some supplies, art supplies, activity supplies, and meals for when you meet with the girls. Pretty simple, but it all adds up. So on the more complicated end, we have our fundraisers and many of our revenue generating activities. So the principle is the same. We need to know how much you think you can bring in revenue, whether that's ticket sales, whether that's giving for a little black dress for Giving Tuesday, some of those sorts of things. That's your revenue. And then what does it cost to generate that dollar? For something like the gala, it costs a lot. It costs food and beverage, it costs the venue, we have decorations, we have a photographer, we have a band, on and on and on. So again, revenue minus expenses is our profit. And if we had been able to have the gala this year, which we should have had last year, this was the plan. Their goal was to raise about $52,000. So this positive 52 is what we use to pay for all of these expenses. Does that make sense? So your fund, every time you buy a fundraising ticket, it's not just about, where the venue is, what kind of food you're gonna get, what the experience is. that is part of it, but the bigger part is how much are we going to raise to fund our mission?
Kendra, we have another question.
Okay.
How do our finances compare with similar leagues?
That's not something that's really widely shared or benchmarked. We are one of the bigger leagues by membership size, but every league is different. They have different fundraisers, different. Some of them have a headquarters, some of them don't. Some of them own their buildings, some of them don't. It really just depends, and that's not information that's widely shared, unfortunately.
One thing that I can say is that all leagues are suffering from a lot of the same sorts of things that we are. So decreases in membership, increase, the decreased ability to do venues. A lot of other states weren't as closed down as we were. So there are other leagues who were able to do fundraising events live because their states allowed it and they thought that it was okay to do, smaller things. The other thing is that just because if you take any specific, any specific league, like the Junior League of Los Angeles had a member who passed away this year and left them $300,000. So
Wow.
yeah. So everything.
Was their president just like thrilled beyond thrilled that she won the lottery?
Yeah. I'll tell you more about that one later, Pendra. But yeah, because there's quickly like we should give it away to the community. So which is, always
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's, we're all of the leagues are seeing the same sorts of things that we are, where we're having reduced, even before COVID, in general, people are less likely to join membership associations than they were 10 years ago. So fewer people are joining. And we've, even though we've changed the requirements or commitments that we ask our members to do, it's just the way of the world is that people are really wanting more transactional kinds of things. Like people aren't joining country clubs, they're paying greens fees. People aren't joining gyms, they're doing quick pass. So we have, there are some people who are kind of like, well, I'll do for training experiences, I'll pay per training. For volunteer stuff, I'll join with other groups. So it's the model that we have is something that appeals to a small group of people. So it's, and it ebbs and flows. So we may see a boost coming back up again as people are able to kind of get back together and sort of looking for that community experience again. But the things that we're suffering from, other leagues are suffering from as well.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Hendry, I just have a couple things that I got in the chat that kind of go off one another. Have we ever thought about selling our building? And then someone noted that in the Diversity and Equity Challenge, which was done by AJLI, there was discussion about having your headquarters location in a more diverse or accessible area to the people that we are serving.
Yes, we have, I think, thought about selling the building is a strong word. It is something that comes up in conversation every now and again. And I don't know, Kathleen, if you have some updates on that, but it is something that, the board of directors has to always be thinking about our fiduciary responsibility to the league. And it's one of the things that you always have to do. It's like when you think about your own personal budget, it's the thing where it's like, will I cancel my gym membership? Will I not take a vacation this year? Everything is on the table all the time. We have not listed it. It's not something that we've gone that far with, but it's something that we sort of consider. I think the last time that we had it market appraised was about 10 years ago, when we were thinking about doing the renovation, because the question was at the time is, do we renovate the space that we have or do we move somewhere else?
And if I can just answer quickly the question about having your headquarters in a more accessible space. So we've got two communities that we serve. One is our internal community, which is our members, and one is the external community, which is all of Greater Boston. So we're while if you kind of look at the circle of the area that we serve, we've got points north, points east, points west, points south. But we're, where we are right now is sort of centrally located. Now, we certainly could say, does it make more sense for us to move our headquarters into, say, Dorchester or Roxbury or, Hyde Park or somewhere else? And then we're maybe in a community where there are more opportunities for that community to make use of our headquarters. It just becomes an issue of, for many of our members do not have cars and are reliant on public transportation, or who live, if you take our membership group and look at the number of people who live within, like a 2 to 3 mile radius of headquarters, there's a big chunk of our membership that is there. But it's certainly something, like if we were to ever say like, okay, let's put, headquarters up, the model that had been looked at before was that we would probably sell it to somebody who would rent us back our headquarter space, just because we have been there for about 80 years at this point. And it is, it's kind of like when your parents decide to sell the childhood home that you grew up in and move to Florida. So there's a little bit of that where we've got some kind of attachment, but it's, if we were ever to be really, putting the headquarters on the market, that would be something that we would take into consideration, and it wouldn't be something that we would do in a silo in the board table. This would be lots and lots, just like when we made the decision to do the headquarters renovation. We did multiple meetings with members at our headquarters. We went to all different regions. We had a meeting in the South Shore, Western suburbs, North Shore, so that people could go somewhere nearby. We called them which was something we used to do, which was called regional membership meetings, so that you could get to a meeting where there was somebody where you could ask questions about this. So if a decision like that were to be being made, this wouldn't be happening at the boardroom table. This would be a series of conversations among the membership, between the membership and leadership. It's not like you'd wake up tomorrow morning and it's like, hey, guess what? We're moving to Roxbury.
Well, a couple more points on what Kathleen just said. We've really gotten away from hosting community projects at headquarters for that exact reason. We used to do like JLB Arts at headquarters, and it was difficult for the girls to get there. And now, when we could have community projects meet in person, we were meeting at Boys and Girls Club or Boston Renaissance Charter School, somewhere with an equity consideration in mind, that the populations that we work with, it's easy and convenient for them to get to. And then the second point that Kathleen mentioned about, if we were to sell our headquarters, we would have to pay rent somewhere. So this expense, the real estate tax portion would go away, but it would just be replaced by rent. Some of these other maintenance costs would probably be replaced by other things. Even now, if we want to host our entire membership, we have to rent other space. So that would just escalate. So while God forbid, if we do burn through our checking account, our cash reserves, and this, $1 million endowment, we probably will have no choice. But I think selling the building is really a worst case scenario, just because it's not a magic bullet. We would still have significant expenses to run our programming.
How is our space zoned? Like, is it retail, or are we able to put a potential office client in it?
I'm
Do-
not sure how it's zoned. I think we could put an office in that space. The question though is that the rent per square foot that we would get from an office tenant is lower than what it would be for a retail tenant. So some kind of consumer goods retail would be our best option just because of the rents that we would be able to command. And also we wouldn't have to do a lot of fit out. We've talked about restaurants, we've talked about coffee shops, we've talked about those kinds of tenants, but that space downstairs is not built out for that. That would require significant investment on our part, which I personally don't believe is the best use of this cash, given what our mission is. And secondly, that also opens us up to increased trash, increased pests, smells, noise, all that kind of stuff. So in a perfect world, we would find another retail tenant. But again, the longer this goes on and the more things change, the more we will have to seriously consider less ideal options.
Yeah, so like I said, we have to consider all things. So among the things that, you know, if you've ever walked upstairs in headquarters, you know that that ground floor space used to be a thrift store. And a lot of leagues supplement their operation expenses through a thrift store, you know, kind of thing. So there would be the possibility of, you know, running some sort of, you know, a thrift shop. I mean, probably not in every single day sort of thing, or doing maybe twice a year rummage sale, like some of the other things that other leagues have done to raise revenues. So this, going back to what Pendra was saying before about the show house being a heavy lift for the amount of money that comes in, that tends to be the issue with the thrift shop as well, is that it's, you know, we have to have all of our members committing to volunteer time, or we're hiring staff, which means salaries and all of that sort of thing. So you end up, it's, you know, it's like that, you know, at what point do we, is it worthwhile doing? And at what point is it like, you know what, let's forget about that. The other thing that I also wanted to mention is when we're talking about the taxes, we only pay taxes on that retail space because we're a nonprofit. We don't pay taxes on our office space. So the sub first floor and first floor are what we are, you know, assessed for taxes on.
Anything else? All right, so back to the budgets. If you have never seen this before, I would ask your chair, just so you get a better sense of, well, what the plan was, but how your specific committee or group operates. And if you are a chair and you've never seen this before, I highly suggest you reach out to your VP and the treasurer and get more involved in some of these numbers. So how do we manage expenses on an ongoing basis? Every month, our bookkeepers send us a report for each committee that looks like this. So each chair or leader can see exactly what she spent and compare it to her total budget numbers to see either what she can spend for the rest of the year or what she has to raise for the rest of the year if she's in a development group. And of course, you can see last year, April, May, June, nothing, we were done. But that's part of your training and your opportunity as a leader to really manage these, to get this experience, to learn these skills, to execute your responsibilities to the league. As to how these numbers get here, I think most of us have seen this. You've either put on an event, you were asked to bring dinner one night, you were asked to run out and get supplies. And so every member is asked to do that with her own money, and then she requests reimbursement from the league. So You fill out your information, you explain why you use this money and how it was important to the mission of your committee, and then you tell us what committee it was and how much. The most important piece of this form that a lot of people skip are these numbers right here, because these codes tell our bookkeepers where to put it in here. So if you've filled this out before and you thought, I don't know what this is, I'm just gonna skip it, please don't do that. Either ask your chair or ask somebody on the finance council, but you find every group, every committee has a number, and every activity has its own number, and they are all found on your budget. So the treasurer has the distinct pleasure of reviewing every single one of these. We send it to our bookkeepers and they cut us a check. What they do that is extremely helpful is when they create the charge in QuickBooks, they update this form. So if there is ever a question, we can go back and check things. We are audited every year annually. So having this clear and appropriate documentation is very important for a lot of things. So if we were looking at this live in QuickBooks right now, I could click on this dollar amount and it would bring me right to this form, and I could see exactly what it was, and we could answer questions or fix a problem if necessary. So somewhere in all these tabs and all these spreadsheets, you've had a hand in these numbers. And the question is where and how much and why. And more importantly, how do you want to learn and how do you want to contribute? Any questions on this piece? So finally, we look at our impact. If we think about all this money that we said we were going to spend in fiscal year 21, the current year, how can we talk about that in a way that is both engaging for donors, for potential program participants, and for our members? How can we explain what that huge number is all about? A lot of it is meals for our program participants, programming for our participants, art supplies, field trips, you name it. The Linda K. Ryan Award, the community grants. And then you think about all the money that we spend in Boston. We're going to caterers, bus companies, restaurants, everything we do provides value to someone else. And then last but not least, the taxes that I mentioned is a pretty big number. And that goes directly to the city of Boston and hopefully our public schools. So that's our impact in the community, which is a lot. The question that we want to ask ourselves is, for some of these, things that are a little bit more squishy, how can we use this amount to our benefit? How can we support like-minded organizations that we have something in common with? How can we, speaking of DEI, how can we hire trainers and speakers who are actual people of color doing real work on the ground? How can we support when we're buying art supplies or whatever it is, women-owned businesses, Black-owned businesses, those sorts of things? How can we use this number and amplify it even more? So that's just the impact on the community. Then we have the impact on ourselves. We spend a lot on training, and I'm not just talking about training like we're doing tonight with a capital T. I mean, the board of directors was a huge training opportunity for anybody who's ever been through it. The executive management team, same thing. All of the events that we put on, all of the programming that we do, that is teaching us something. Also volunteering, there is value to our time. There is value to the social time that we used to spend together in person and now do online. there are opportunities to learn how to be a philanthropist, like we talked about. I do believe that's something that, has to be learned and has to be taught. And that is one of the ways the League excels, is to think about how to teach us to be active and engaged in our community with our dollars. We are also putting more resources to DEI than we ever have before. And last but not least, there's value in being a member of our organization, of belonging here, of knowing that you always have a place to come. If that's really all I have to say. The only thing I wanted to end on was that we can't do any of this without the hard work and generosity of the women who came before us, and the hard work and generosity of those of us who are here today. So I would really like to hear what you have to say and what questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
It's a lot. It is a lot, but
You covered everything.
in an hour, oh my goodness. I tried to talk quickly.
So Pendry, at the end, you were talking about the debt we owe to the women who came before us, many of whom are still members as sustainers. If you could just talk briefly about how what we actually pay in membership fee doesn't actually cover the cost of what it costs to have members, and how the sustainer dues help keep everything going. So if we were to take the actual value of what it costs to run the organization and divide it among the active members, the discrepancy between what we actually pay and what it actually costs.
So it's been a hot topic, especially in the last couple of years with COVID, and especially this time last year, a lot of people really were concerned, myself included, about losing their jobs. And sometimes that dues payment is a lot to handle. But unfortunately, while it can seem like a lot at times, it's really not enough to cover everything that we need to do. We make up the difference with a few different things. A lot of these restricted funds that we talked about are from women who are long gone and felt that the League was very important to them and they wanted to keep it going. A lot of it comes from the annual fund, which a lot of sustainers support, even though they don't technically have to. And that's where we want to get to, the place where people support the League because they found value in their organization, in this organization, and want to pay it forward. The more we can bring in with grants and sponsorships, the less we have to rely on dues and high dollar ticket events that really make joining the League a stretch for a lot of people. And when we talk about DEI efforts, that's a huge piece of it. So the more that we can get people to participate in some of these ways, the less burden we have on these items right here. What else? Yeah, so I see Sandra made that point to bringing in more diverse members and memberships. Part of it is this cost, and how can we subsidize from here the women who can't pay from here? Because as Kathleen said, it's not only their dues, it's everything else that it costs per member to run our organization.
Is there any value in having more members, a little lower on the dues, but increase the members, and maybe some of you know, I know we like fancy events. I mean, I do too, but maybe if
Right.
also toning down, toning down those as well and making them more accessible, the ticket price, and maybe you'll have more attendees and more involvement as well. I don't, because sometimes even can't afford to go to an event that I'd like to.
Right. That is certainly an option, I think, and it depends on the kind of league that we want to be, because before we were very Newberry Street, we were very show house, we were very red bottom shoes, and that era, I think, is no longer attainable for a lot of things. In an ideal world, you would have your events completely underwritten. You have a sponsor or someone else who pays for the whole thing, and whatever we buy in tickets is our profit. Rumor has it that the Junior League of Houston has such an arrangement with Southwest, and so we need to find our own either big donor or corporate sponsor that'll underwrite all of these things, because right now, if we want to throw an event, where's my spreadsheet? We literally pay for every single thing, every single plate of food, every single, chair in that room. Those are expenses that take away from this bottom line. So we get those donated, this number here would be so much bigger.
Have we asked for that in the past as you have? Well, I'm still new. Those new people, they still have enthusiasm for
No, it's a great question. And it's a lot of times there's, I've been talking with the Women's Foundation of Boston, and they've run into the same thing. Is a lot of times you're kind of like, here's all the stuff we're doing in the community. Do you want to just give us $10,000 so we can keep doing our work? And they're like, no, but if you're having an event, we'll put our name on the event for $10,000. Like they want the bang for the buck. And we have done that. We've had corporate sponsors for Gala before. We've just never had the entire thing underwritten by anybody. So we've had, we had for this year's Gala, the virtual Gala, we do have a corporate sponsor. I wish I could remember right off the top of my head who it is, but
It's EY Lilly.
Thank you.
Yep.
So they're they're sponsoring us so that they're, helping to offset some of the costs. Even though it's a virtual event, there are still costs involved. So it is, we are going out and asking. One of the difficult things is the nature of the organization, because there's all this churn all the time. Is whoever is chairing Gala this year is off it next year. And it's, we try to do our best about preparing the next person coming in, but there is a lot of churn. A lot of times we'll get a really great sponsor because somebody works there. You have somebody who works at Bank of America who comes in with a big dollar amount, and then next year she's, either leaves the Gala or, goes to Stainer, and there goes that money. So it's, if anybody has any kind of connection, if anybody works for a corporation that doesn't this kind of giving, please let us know. We will, I will show up with my begging bowl, any place, anytime, anywhere. But it's hard to get. And the other thing is that right now, because there are no events, and because everybody's kind of, it's COVID, where everybody's, they're cutting stuff off all over the place and trying to come up with that money. And all of the nonprofits are out there with their begging bowls, just like us. So
has there ever been talk about, I don't know, how do you combine a lot of charities do some of the same work. How do you work together in that arena? Does that help in any way at all?
It does. I would say, aside from COVID, the struggle that we're having now is that we don't have the infrastructure to do a lot of this work, as Kathleen was explaining, because we never had to before. Right. This right here, Kate Spade was our sponsor, and that's what funded a lot of what we wanted to do. So we don't really have those relationships. We don't have the institutional know-how to do some of these things. And we're getting there, and we'll get there, mostly because we have to, but it's not something that we can turn on like a switch. So like Kathleen said, if you have experience in this arena, or if you work for a large corporation, or if you know people who have ins in those sorts of organizations, please send them her way.
I'm a small business owner, so I know that,
Yeah.
80% of my income just can't come from one person.
Exactly.
Spread
So
out.
we had a lot of eggs in two
That's
baskets.
nice. I mean, yeah, you do get, you get comfortable, right? I mean, it's absolutely understandable. Everybody's having to really go under a microscope and figure out what's next.
Yeah, so we'll get there. It's just taking some time, and then of course COVID is not helpful, but we'll get there.
And the other plug that I'd put out there is if you work for, if you do work for, not even a huge company, so many companies will match or 50% match any donation that you make. So when you make, your $100 contribution to the community and training fund, fill out the form with your company, or just put your company's name down and we will go and ask for it on your behalf. And also, you also would only have to, if you pay $50 of that and your company matches that 50, you get to your 100 and your company pays for a portion of that, which is the whole reason that we have a fundraising requirement, is so that you can have opportunities to have other people supplement the cost of your experience in Junior League. So we have that instead of just kind of chunking it in on top of what your membership dues would be.
The other thing I saw in the chat was tax breaks for hosting something else in the downstairs space. That gets a little bit complicated because of how the city looks at that space. So like Kathleen mentioned, the upstairs is tax exempt. We don't pay taxes on that. The downstairs, we do pay taxes on that because we generate commercial revenue. If we were to say, okay, this retail thing isn't working out, we are going to start the thrift store back up again, we could apply to have the downstairs portion exempted as well if we were going to use it for our nonprofit purposes. But I don't think that's something that we could ever come back from. It's not like, 1 year we could use it for our purposes, not pay tax. The next year we could get a tenant, and it doesn't quite work that way. The one tax break we did get was from the period between when Kate Spade left and Fat Face moved in. Because we had no tenant, the city did cut us a little bit of a break there because of the vacancy. Hopefully next year, Marissa and her team will apply for the same thing for the period after Fat Face leaves until whenever a new tenant comes along. Our PPP loan. Kathleen, do you know, or Marissa, do you know what the status of that is?
I do not.
The last I heard was that we could apply to have it forgiven as a grant. And of course, I'm sure many of you know, the whole PPP thing was kind of a disaster in the way it was handled overall. And so our bank was waiting for further instructions from the government on how to handle that. But hopefully we will not have to repay that money.
Pendry, I do have a question that I got in the chat. Let me just go through it. Has there been discussion on if we should expand our grant/sponsorship team or have more people working on it?
I can actually speak to that. Sorry, I had to join late because I was on another call. I am Miriam. I am the VP of development for this year and for next year. So this is very appropriate.
Perfect. Please tell us.
Yeah, so we are actually going to be working on expanding that with placement. That is literally on my to-do list, written next in front of me right now, that we don't currently have dedicated headcount and placements for sponsorships, especially corporate sponsorships, and knowing that that is a key factor for the success of the league and for our events and for all of our great programs that we do. So we will be working with placement to determine what a sizable group of that would be. And so that potentially will be a lead or chair role available for next year. So if you are very passionate about sponsorships and corporate sponsors, please contact me. I put my email in the chat. It's just development@jlboston.org. And so we're definitely looking at ways to find multiple streams of revenue so that we can offset a lot of these costs and not be putting all of our eggs into one basket. And I do want to just pause there. If anyone has any other questions around grant sponsorships, it is a key focus of ours. We've already identified about 25 companies we're going after that we think represent League and our values. So if you have other ones, we'd be happy to add those on. But if anyone has questions, I just wanted to pause so people can voice that around sponsorships or grants. Hope they answered the question. And there was some commentary I joined. I don't know if that had already been resolved around just the event size and the cost and making it accessible. So you're getting a sneak peek because I'm going to be telling the board tomorrow night, but that is actually our platform for next year and going forward is working on accessible and profitable events. And really taking a look at what is the cost of woman hours and investment from our league members and cost to league upfront to make money off events. And so some of the things that you may be seeing next year, pending approval, of course, is a wider variety of events that have lower ticket costs. And really, again, looking for that donated corporate sponsor underwriting any way that we can offset the cost and not really be taking that all on ourselves. So if you have experience in that, please send me an email. That is something, again, development@jlboston.org, and let's connect and see how we can make the league some money.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I would say the real aim of the game is we don't want to do necessarily less. We just want to use less of our cash and hopefully more of our donors and partners instead. So it's just a big circle, right? Like we need diverse members who can afford it, but just goes around and round and round. And the more people we have participating both in our membership and outside our membership, the more successful we'll be. Anybody else? All right, well then I greatly appreciate everybody listening to me ramble. And I also appreciate Kathleen and Miriam and everybody else who shared their experience because everybody has such a different aspect to bring to the table. But if you have further questions, you can either reach out to me or I'll throw Marissa under the bus. You can always reach her at treasurerelect@jlboston.org. She has a whole team of people that are, willing and able to help you think through some of these situations, work on your budget, answer questions, and plan for next year. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Pendry.
Thanks,
Thank
Pendry.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, Henry. Thanks, everyone.
Good to see you all.